everyone. For today's session, we have with us Mr. Yuvraj Nurbankar, Advocate, High Court and Supreme Court of India. Sir has completed his bachelor's from Pune and is a gold medalist in the field of law of contracts. He has completed his LLM from Mumbai University and has conferred fellowship in Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, London, and has also received All India rank first in cyber laws. Currently, Sir is practicing in High Court of Bombay and also in Supreme Court of India. He has also been appointed as an arbitrator in several commercial arbitrations and appeared as a lead counsel. Sir has conducted more than 162 lectures, seminars on various topics, including the law of arbitration. He had been honored by Shivashtra Bhushan and Tejankit Award for work in his legal field. Sir, we are very delighted to have you with us.
Yeah, the topic today, I feel is quite interesting for me as an arbitrator. I act as an arbitrator under Section 11 in the High Court appointed arbitrator. You have Section 11 where the High Court appoints the arbitrator, and sometimes as a party nominated arbitrator. So I have had the fortune of having the arbitration from both the sides, as from the counsel's perspective as well as from the perspective of the arbitrator. And for me, COVID-19 has been a phenomenal change in the way that we used to work, in the way that we used to conduct the arbitral proceedings as a counsel as well as an arbitrator. And I'm quite happy that Madhyastha has chosen this topic of ODR in ADR to say so, uh, because I think this is going to be the future of the arbitration. ODR is going to be the future of litigation as well, but let's not go into that because I think there we have some severe handicap of infrastructure deficiencies in the court system. Fortunately, in arbitration, we don't have that handicap. I have seen the arbitral institutions coping up with this challenge very efficiently. Institutions as well as the ad hoc arbitrations have been coping up with this challenge quite innovatively. So yes, to begin with the topic, let me tell you that to have the ODR in arbitration is not something that COVID-19 has brought to us. As an arbitrator, I used to go for Zoom platform or WebEx or Google Meet even earlier, for two reasons. Firstly, because of the logistics. You guys probably may not be aware of the cost implications of the arbitration, because you the being practitioners, our the major grievance of our client is always the cost implications of an arbitration, and those cost implications do not arise from the arbitrator's cost. That is understood that they have to pay the fees of a tribunal. What they are taken aback is by the fees of the venue. When I am booking a five-star hotel for my meeting and we walk in, we have the we have the meeting of 10 minutes, we have a coffee and we get out, and we are handed over the bill of, let's say, 50,000. Now that comes as a big shock for the clients. Maybe corporates can cope up with that kind of expenses, but for the ordinary litigants, that comes as a big shock. So I personally, as an arbitrator, have always chosen virtual platforms for the procedural meetings. Just to tell you guys now, any arbitration is divisible into two parts. First is the procedural aspect and other is a substantive aspect. Let me tell you frankly that 80% of our task during the conduct of arbitral proceedings is procedural. Substantive thing starts really when the parties are done with their task of arguing the matter and I sit down to write an award. That's when the substantive task really begins. Of course, it makes its guest appearance in between when the parties are cross-examining the witness. I have to step in as a judge and I have to stop them asking from irrelevant questions. So the judge keeps in coming and visiting, but most of it is clerical. Like, I have to be there, I have to witness, I have to gather the I have to watch the demeanor of the witness, all that. So I personally feel that ODR is the best platform for having the procedural meetings. Let's say that you guys have to frame the issues. You are supposed to give me the issues, list of issues, both the claimant and the respondents. Now, I personally don't see a reason for all of us meeting personally, physically, to decide the issues. You can tell me your issues, he can tell me his issues, and then I can formulate the common issues. So, I would feel that irrespective of the COVID-19 situation, ODR is going to stay for a long time. It's not going to go along with COVID-19, and it should not go out along with COVID-19. Though we all pray for this situation should get back to normalcy as soon as possible, but I certainly feel that the transformation that COVID-19 has brought to ADR, that should not go away with COVID-19. Uh, Having said that, let me tell you that Law Commission has, I think that's 103rd report of Law Commission that says that you should extend this virtual hearing to cover even the arbitration hearings. That's 103rd Law Commission's report, I guess. Now, unfortunately, no one really paid any heed to that recommendation of Law Commission. In 2014, way back in 2014, you had the Law Commission report saying that please use technology for conduct of arbitral hearings. But I did not see many of the arbitrators doing it. I don't blame the arbitrators. See, try to understand this situation. You have the arbitrators most of the time, the former judges of the High Court and the senior counsels who belong to the old school where they don't even like the interns searching something on Google and coming out with an answer. They want the traditional find a book from the rack and then try to flip the pages. That approach invariably creeps in when they sit as an arbitrator, and therefore they find themselves quite in an awkward equation with the technical equipments. Then they have their, this online phobia that what if I could not see someone, what if the person sitting across can't hear me. So these are the handicaps that have really hampered the growth of online arbitration still date. But now let me tell you that in all the arbitrations that I'm doing, I'm quite happy to tell you that 100% of the arbitrations are going on online. So I think that's a phenomenal shift. Now coming to the legislative framework, see, in Indian Arbitration Act, there is nothing that prohibits the parties from choosing online platform. It's very important to understand. There is a complete autonomy. As you all know, the party autonomy is the basis, is the fountain of the entire arbitral process. So parties can choose virtual as well as physical. There is no bar, there is no prohibition. Now question comes when a stage comes for oral hearing, that is it compulsory to give them in person hearing? Is it compulsory for me to call them physically to my office and or maybe a conference hall and then give them the hearing? Arbitration Act does not say so. If you look at, of course, the Arbitration Act, you have I think section 24 of the Arbitration Act, which says that you have to give parties the oral hearing if the parties so desire. But oral hearing does not mean physical hearing. Oral hearing can always be through online portal like Zoom, WebEx, or Google Meet. It suffice. It is enough if I give the parties oral hearing. It is immaterial as to through which form, on which platform I am giving them the oral hearing. So please understand that there is no bar for oral hearings, and it is well suited. It is well recognized under the Indian Arbitration Act. With this, let me just now open the floor for the questions, and I'll try to go ahead on the line of questions. Uh, and if necessary, I'll make certain departures to maybe cover something which is not directly asked by you, but maybe which is relevant for you guys to know. So please, I think you can begin with the questions, and then I'll try to suit my answers to your questions. Please.
So firstly, thank you so much for explaining the topic so well. So we'll start with the question answer. So Urja has a question for you.
Good morning, sir. My
Morning.
first question to you is: often the process of ODR is believed to be an electronic online form of ADR. What exactly is ODR, and is its scope just limited to ADR, or does it extend to other dispute resolution mechanisms?
Okay, Urja, see, ODR is not something that is limited to ADR at all. ODR is just a generic name. I feel it can be called as an electronic resolution of dispute. You then call it ERD. Then you call it online resolution of dispute. Then you call it ORD. So it doesn't matter the acronym, and the name nomenclature doesn't matter. All it means is that the parties are using something digital to meet each other and to convey their ideas. So it can be probably it can be in a litigation, it can be in an arbitration. Uh, Coming to the international perspective, ODR is not something that is new to the international institutions. Like from my brief encounter with SIAC, the Singapore International Arbitration Center, these guys are doing phenomenally well when it comes to online dispute resolution. If any one of you is interested, I would strongly recommend to read ICC's notes on remote dispute resolution. Then there is HKIC, the Hong Kong International Arbitration Centers regulation. Fortunately, DIC has come, Delhi International Arbitration Center has come out with the online dispute resolution modalities. You have CIARB, of which I am a fellow. They have come out with extensively detailed remote hearing guidelines. So yes, ODR is not something that's limited to arbitration at all. It is something that is all pervasive, and soon there is going to be a time when the litigation has to also uh, adjust itself to this mode of resolution of disputes. I hope that answers.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for that answer, sir. So the next question is, when hearings are conducted remotely and all participants are sitting in different areas of the world, so what jurisdiction shall apply in that case, sir?
Now, see, I wouldn't answer that only in an online setting. The question that you ask really goes too far. See, first let us understand what's the need to have a seat. What's the need to have a venue? There is a new concept in an international arbitration which is called as a delocalized arbitrations, if you have heard of it. Delocalized arbitrations are the arbitrations where you do not have any specific seat or venue. We call it floating arbitrations. They are not bound to any specific seat or a venue or a country or a city. They just happen all over. Like the parties, they are seated in different countries. That's why it's international commercial arbitration. But there is no seat. There is no venue. Now, just mind you that these are not the form of arbitrations that are encouraged. Why? Because you have to have a seat and venue, because there is a concept of lex fori. Now, what is lex fori? Lex fori is the law of the forum. Now, why do you need a lex fori? Because lex fori is the law that decides which courts will supervise the process of arbitration. Which is that court where you have to rush to if you wish to get some interim relief? Which is that court which you need to rush to if you need the court assistant in the midst of arbitral proceedings? So arbitration cannot be, to, if I can call it, orphan. Arbitration has to have a supervisory court system, a state court system, in order for an arbitration to go on smoothly. And that is a reason that you must have a venue and you must have a seat. If you have a seat, then you have the lex fori, law of the seat. And you have, once you have the law of the seat, then you can guarantee that yes, this arbitration is going to be smooth, because there is someone watching. There's a big boss watching over there, and therefore the parties will be under the control. Now, coming to your question, that which is that seat which will be in an ODR format. Let me tell you that seat is something that is completely different concept than the venue. I think by now everyone knows this distinction between venue and the seat. Seat is a jurisprudential, it's a juridical concept. As I told you that lex fori is bound to the seat. Venue can be anything. Suppose, for example, if you and me enter into a contract and we say that the courts at Mumbai will have a jurisdiction. It's an arbitration clause, but I say courts in Mumbai will have a jurisdiction. When I say courts in Mumbai will have a jurisdiction, what I mean is that Mumbai courts will exercise the supervisory jurisdiction over my arbitration. Correct? It becomes a lex fori. Now, lex fori is not the term that we use in domestic arbitration, but understand it to be basically the same concept. Now, though I have agreed the courts in Mumbai to be the seat, or the Mumbai to be a seat, parties or maybe Bhunesh can tell me that, look, I can't come to Mumbai all the way from Pune. Both the parties are in Pune. We might have agreed for Mumbai. Let's have the arbitration in Pune. So that very moment, Pune becomes the venue. But in the event if the disputes arise, the parties are not going to go to Pune, because under section 2, subsection E of the Arbitration Act, the court is defined to mean the court of ordinary jurisdiction or principal court of the jurisdiction. This is not to be confused with the definition of the court under CPC that you will get from around section 16 onwards. We have the jurisdictional sections. Now, I wouldn't take you to too much detailed into that because that would form part of a different topic altogether. The point I'm making is that venue is different and seat is different. So in an online format, the parties will have to agree to a seat of an arbitration, even if there's one is sitting in Calcutta, one is sitting in Hyderabad, the arbitrators in Mumbai, and that's happening with my arbitrations. But we all have agreed to a seat in either in an agreement that the parties will be seated, will be constituted to be seated at Mumbai. So they can join the meeting from anywhere in the world, but the seat will be constituted to be Mumbai. It's what we in law call a deeming provision. Okay. Suppose if the parties do not agree, then it is prerogative of the arbitrator to decide the seat. So I will take into account the convenience of the parties and I'll decide and I'll dictate in my first procedural order that look here, we all are going for virtual arbitration. I am declaring Mumbai to be seat of an arbitration. That's it. That's my prerogative as an arbitrator. If you guys don't agree, if you agree, then I'm bound by that. As a matter of propriety, I should not go beyond the party's choice. But if you fail to agree, the prerogative is with me to declare the seat of the arbitration, and that continues to be the seat for all the purposes, irrespective of the fact that the party is joining from which place in India or which place in world. So that's the seat concept of a seat in an ODR format.
Thank you for that insightful answer, sir.
Thank you very much, sir, for the insights onto the topic. The
Yes.
next question is, will an award or settlement agreement passed through ODR have enforceability? And regarding the conduct of the proceedings, what procedure to follow? Do we need separate clauses to bind the parties to ODR?
Okay. Yeah, Krishna, see, that's a very crucial question. When I am as an arbitrator, when I as an arbitrator is dictating the parties to go for virtual mode of arbitration, I need to take into account several factors. The first factor, the most important factor is the case too complex for a virtual hearing? Now, suppose if it's an engineering arbitration. In engineering arbitrations, there are so many construction concepts. There has to be an inspection, site inspection. There has to be a huge witness testimony. Then I would not really be quite willing to go for virtual mode of arbitration. I would be preferring the old traditional, old school physical settings. One. Secondly, I need to take into account the technical literacy of the party. Suppose if one of the parties from my arbitration is from Kolhapur. Now I belong to that place, so I know on every Monday there is a power outage still in Kolhapur. No, the problem would be that if I have my arbitration on Monday and if the there is a power failure, then I am indirectly breaching section 18 of the Arbitration Act, which talks of equal opportunity of presenting the case. So I have to be very conscious of the fact that is the party sitting in a locality where there is a low bandwidth, where there are problems of recurring power failure. If it is so, then I must refrain from dictating the parties to go for virtual setting. In fact, there are judgments which say that you should not attempt virtual hearing when the parties are not are not technically equipped to go for virtual settings. So that is that's a most crucial factor that I would consider while dictating the parties to go for technical or the virtual mode of arbitration. Coming to the procedure, now your question is really it has two legs. The first was the enforceability, which I'll come to little later, but the first, how to conduct it. Now, conducting a virtual arbitration is a big challenge because as an arbitrator, let me tell you the feeling that I have. We call it paranoia, or we have that. I have written recently an article on live law. If you guys are interested, you can just have a look at it. I think that was something called as a virtual paranoia or due process paranoia in virtual arbitration. What is due process paranoia? It means that when I decide to go for virtual arbitration, I always have this anxiety that what if one of the parties is not able to connect immediately to Zoom? What if while one party is offline, other party addresses me something? Now in an arbitration, it is grossly unfair to listen to one side when the other party is not there. That's considered to be a gross abuse of principles of natural justice. So as an arbitrator, I'm always under pressure of due process, because if you are aware, under section 34, breach of due process is one of the grounds for setting aside an award, and therefore let me tell you, the award is always written for a losing party. Always remember, in an arbitration, the award is not written for a winning party. Award is written for a losing party, because I have to convince the losing party why you lost. If I can convince the losing party why it lost, then my award is good. Award is not written for a winning party. If I have won an arbitration, I don't even bother to read the award. If I am given, like, if I get a 10 CR award, why would I'll tell you from my experience, I have never read an award which I have won. I don't need to, because I have won that. I'll read it when it is challenged in section 34 and when I have to defend it. But if I lose, then I immediately pick it up and then I look at the reasons why I have lost. Therefore, the award is always written for a losing party. And as an arbitrator, I must keep in mind that losing party. I must be conscious as to the fact that any breach of principle of natural justice is going to cost me my award and my credibility in the court of law. That's very crucial. So coming to Krishna's question, I need to keep in mind the procedural timetable. So just to elaborate, we all are meeting for the first time in an arbitration. I need to pass a detailed procedural order as to which platform I am going to use, because there are so many platforms. But I need to prefer a platform which has got an IP end-to-end encryption for confidentiality, for data privacy. I think Webex has it, Zoom has it. Most of the now platforms, they do have it. I need to look at whether there are breakout rooms, because there are so many occasions when parties need to meet amongst themselves. They don't want to reveal something to a counsel or to an arbitrator. So is there a provision of a breakout room? And there are, what is a required bandwidth for that platform to work? If it's minimum bandwidth, it's good, because then the party in technologically remote areas also can join the arbitration. So I would prefer that platform. What are the cost implications? If it's a free version of Zoom, I would not like my arbitration to get over in 45 minutes or 40 minutes. We all have to log out, then log in using the same link. That's something I would not prefer as an arbitrator. So I think all these aspects do count when I'm passing my first procedural order. So that's about the first. Conducting the cross examination and examination of the party is altogether again a different challenge, because in one of the arbitrations that I was conducting, I was a counsel cross examining the witness. I could see from his face that he was staring at something. Now, I could not really point it out immediately, but it took me some time to understand that he is looking at something. And then, to my horror, I realized that he was being constantly prompted by the counsel who was sitting just across him. And he was holding the board, and he was writing yes or no, or I don't remember the classic answer that we have in a cross examination. So he was showing it to the witness. Now, then I asked the arbitrator to immediately stop the arbitration. I said, sir, please rotate the camera. Immediately rotate the camera. I need to see who are all in the room. And to our horror, we understood, we realized that the entire law firm was sitting opposite to the client. there were almost 8 associates with a partner, with the clerks and all. They were all sitting in front of the client, and all we could see was one junior and the client who was facing the cross. So the arbitrator realized what must have happened, and we could discard examination. But look at the situation, that it is so difficult, because and then in another arbitration, let me tell you, this did not happen. I could save it in time. Uh, this is the old way of doing it, physically prompting someone. There are pop-ups that appear on the screen. If I connect my WhatsApp to my laptop, then someone can answer through a WhatsApp and it will pop up here. I don't need to look at anywhere. I have to just look at the bottom of the screen. So I need to also ask the witness to share his screen while he is being cross-examined. Then I need to have the 360-degree camera installed, or maybe I need to ask him to first show me the entire room, and then you sit in such a way that the door is behind you. So if anyone is entering the room, I can see him entering and going out. No, these are the things we never thought about. We used to think about the questions to be asked to a witness. We never used to think about how to put the witness in check. No, that's the additional burden that we have taken upon ourselves due to COVID-19 and due to virtual setting. But I think this is must. This has to be done. Apart from the witness testimony, there are certain mannerisms that the parties must follow. you should mute yourself when you are not talking. You should switch on your video because you are the participating council. You can't have your video switched off. You need to raise your hand if you need to, maybe electronically or physically if you need to interrupt. Now these are the mannerisms which you won't believe that I make it a part of my first procedural order, which may look kind of childish to have this as a part of the first procedural order, but having experienced, having my own share of experience, I'm doing it. That these are the mannerisms you need to follow. If I'm too reluctant to put all that, then I ask the parties to refer to the institutional rules like SIIC or HKIAC or CIARB to understand what I expect from the parties. I can ask them to refer to that. So these are the things that you must take care of. And finally, coming to the final arguments while conducting the arbitral hearings, I think the golden word of virtual arbitration is discipline, discipline, and discipline. You can't have the arbitrations old way that I don't know how many of you have really attended the court proceedings where there is a nonsensical practice in Indian law where the witness is asked, what do you say is incorrect? What you say is false? And then have you ever seen a man who is saying, yes, what I'm saying is false, what I'm saying is incorrect, what I'm saying is not true? But that's a practice we follow in court. Now we call it as suggestions. Now that's, you would be told by your senior on the very first day of you joining the chamber that please you have to ask the questions this way. But I don't understand the practice. The witness is never going to say no. In fact, I had seen one witness in the jest of maybe he was in some other world, and he said, yes, what are you saying is incorrect. Yes, what I said is, what you said is a false. Yes, he did not understand the purport of the questions. I said, I'm not going to record it as a yes. He probably did not understand the purport. So uh, in an online arbitration, you need to refrain from asking irrelevant questions about the contents of the document. Now, how to prove the documents is again probably I had I think it should be on the YouTube, a lecture on the marking and exhibiting of the documents I had given some time back, and there I have explained how to prove the document. So for proving the document, you need to prove the contents of the document. Now there is a again evil practice of asking the witness about contents of the document. That can you see that this document is executed on 10th of January 1983? Then why alone every one of us can see that is executed in 1983? But you will see lawyers wasting days and days asking someone about contents of the document. Now under section 91, the contents of the document speak for themselves and documentary evidence prevails over oral evidence. So you don't need to uh, adduce oral evidence to prove the documents. You have 61, 62 primary, 63 secondary, 64 in which cases you can have a primary over secondary over primary, and then 65 A and B for electronic evidence. So you don't need to ask a witness about orally about the contents of the document. So I feel in a virtual setting, all these evil practices must stop. As an arbitrator, as a counsel, I must make myself very clear that look, these are the issues. These are the admitted issues. Parties will not unnecessarily argue about admitted issues. I have seen two parties in an arbitration, a major construction company and a major pharmaceutical company. A dispute arose out of a contract. And in the first paragraph itself, claimant said that on so and so date, parties executed a contract. You won't believe the respondent in the gist of denial said the contents of paragraph 1 are false and incorrect. Now, are you really disputing the very execution of the contract which gave birth to this arbitration? It's like challenging the legitimacy of your own parents, because you are in the world because of them. And then you are saying, no, I dispute that proposition. No, in the gist of denial. So it's like you should avoid these cardinal mistakes. You can't just deny for the sake of denial. And I abhor this practice. Even in admission and denial of documents, I show them the sale deed. I deny this. I show them the receipt. I deny this. I show them their own lawyer's notice that they had sent to you. I deny this. What do you mean? That some lawyer so much interested in your case stole your facts, used his letterhead, and sent it across to his client. This doesn't make a sense. So you must deny. Now, if you look at the Commercial Courts Act, which has newly come, not newly, but now it's quite old, the Commercial Courts Act, in an admission and denial of documents, you can't simply deny a document. You must give a reason as to why are you denying the document. Are you disputing the execution? Are you disputing the contents? Are you disputing the very existence of a document? So I think a virtual arbitration, that discipline that we are lacking must come. If you look at any international arbitration, and I pray that you someday you will have a fortune of witnessing those international arbitrations, they were so crisp, so to the point, and in such a strict regime that you really envy them. That had this been the situation in India, then we could have got rid of all the pending arbitrations and litigations. You can't argue something irrelevant. You can't asking some nonsense questions to a witness. Now, this is something that we need to really imbibe in our culture. So this is so far as the conduct of the oral hearings. You can always have the written submissions emailed beforehand when you start with an oral hearing. So the counsels do have their written representations projected on the screen for the arbitrators to have a look at the screen. Then there are, I think there is several softwares by several institutions. I think ICC has got Netcase. There are several softwares for document storage. So there is a third party technical manager who is sitting over there. So if I say that please Mr. X project page number 87, then that page is projected for all of us to see. So you don't need to really, fumble around and flip through your pages. Whatever is required for the witness to see is on the screen. So you can take such technical support if you have that financial capacity. Then I think the last portion would be about the oral submissions. You can't have the oral submissions going on for forever. Like you need to limit the time in a virtual setting. Like each party will be given 90 minutes to argue. The US Supreme Court still follows that system of the cap on oral hearings. In US Supreme Court, they literally press a buzzer that you have in a moot court, that you need to sit down. Even if you're arguing an important constitutional issue, you need to sit down. Now, this sitting down is not something that usually happens in our high courts. If you see a senior counsel arguing there, then no one is there in the court to have the guts to ask him to sit down. He goes on, and he goes on, because there are solicitors sitting behind to whom he is going to charge for every word that he's uttering. This should not happen in an arbitration scenario. So I think with this, you can have an efficient arbitration even in an online setting. Coming to second leg of Krishna's question about the enforceability of the arbitral award. See, understand, there is nothing in law which requires weighting awards. Now, weighting award is the term that we use for traditional awards where you actually sign with a pen. There is nothing in law which requires the award to be, of course, it has to be replaced with a digital signature. You must affix your digital signature. There has to be authentication. But as an arbitrator, I will always prefer to sign the award with my pen and then send the copies to the arbitrators. But if you are really asking me the jurisprudential question as to are they valid, my personal opinion is they are perfectly valid. There is nothing in law, because I think it's section 4A of Information Technology Act, which says that when law requires you to do something in a written form, it can always be done in an electronic form. I think that's section 4A of the Information Technology Act of 2000. So this section itself confers legitimacy on all the correspondences, on all the email exchanges, on all the submissions, procedural orders, evidence, and the final award. Because law very clearly says whatever can be done in a documentary format can be done electronically. So I don't see any problem for recognition of electronic awards, maybe, but there has to be a digital signature affixed. Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir.
So thank you so much for the answer, sir. So our next question is regarding the cross-cultural issues that the practice of ADR has also seen since a long time, with the parties coming from different cultures are having a lot of conflicts between them because of this cross-cultural issues. So how do you think the cross-cultural challenge could be overcome in the process of ODR?
See, I personally feel that the question that Bhunesh you have asked probably really gets a significance in an international scenario, where there are really a big differences in arbitrators and counsels who belong to common law jurisdiction and who belong to civil law jurisdictions. Now, common law jurisdictions, for like we all belong to common law tradition. So for us, the cross examination is a rule. But if you go to civil law jurisdiction, they prove all the facts on affidavits, and they look at you with such a question mark on their face when you request them for a cross examination. So this cultural shock and this cultural friction really happens when you go in an international setting. If you're talking of the domestic settings, I personally do not feel that there is so much of a cultural shock or cultural difference or the technical gap between the parties, their preparedness, their technical literacy. Uh, because most of the times the arbitrations that I have seen, subject to correction, that they generally happen between the corporations, between the I would say not, the arbitration has not really percolated down to the rural litigation. The urban litigation is most of the times the biggest consumer of the arbitral process. So here they are always represented by the lawyers who have the enough infrastructure to represent their clients in a virtual setting. So unless the parties really belong to, let's say, as I give an example, maybe a cities which are in the remote part of Maharashtra or in the remote part of India, where there is a problem of bandwidth or maybe electricity, I do not see really a big issue for the parties to go for a virtual setting. Of course, as I told you, that you must always keep in mind if your decision of holding the virtual hearing affects the parties' cost equations. For example, sometimes the arbitrations are so huge that you need to have a third party support, third party technical support for an arbitration to go on smoothly, and their charges are phenomenal. If you ever encounter one, you would understand that they charge like they might even cross the arbitrator's fees sometimes. So there you need to really be conscious of the cost implications, because if you are having it at your will and at your pleasure, you must be conscious of what the parties expectations of costs are. You can't really have it because I'm an arbitrator, I want to have it this way, please engage this, please engage that. I can't do that way. I have to be completely conscious of the cost implications, because the schedule of the arbitration act puts a cap on the arbitrator's fees. It does not put a cap on logistic fees. That's something that you always must keep in mind. The venue charges, these technical Zoom setup ka charges and all that, they are not form they do not form part of the arbitration cost. So I think there you must keep in mind this cost implication. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Next question is how to solve the great economic divide between the developing and the developed nation in terms of approaches to the practice of ODR and its implications.
Uh, as I told you again, from what my brief encounter with the international commercial arbitrations, I have not seen the parties technique, the parties having the technical handicap. Uh, Even if you have one party from Kenya and you have one party from Nairobi, or you have one party from South Africa, or you take any underdeveloped or maybe developing country. I recently had an arbitration where the opposing counsel was from Pakistan and their company was based out of Pakistan. Now these are all developing countries. I did not see any technical barrier, I did not see any technical handicap, because fortunately we are in an era where most of them are equipped with basic technical preparedness. You don't really come out of Amazon forest and then you start an arbitration. You are already there, you are running a plant, you have a machinery over there, you are having a huge investment laid down there, and then disputes arise, and then you go for an arbitration. So the very fact that the parties have come for an arbitration, and the very fact that they are able to contact you probably is a big testimony of the fact that they are technically equipped. But as you can never say no, there might be possibilities where the parties might find themselves in a little difficult or precarious situation. The biggest problem, Urja, let me tell you, is of the time zone. uh, we may brush it aside as like a time zone is nothing, but I'll tell you from my experience, there was an arbitration where the one counsel was from US, and the arbitrators, two of three, were from US, and I used to get up at night to make my final submissions, and that really hampered my capacity to argue well, because I used to have the court in daytime. I could not say no to court. The courts do not like to hear no. If you tell them that I have got an arbitration in the night, the first thing that they will do is to dismiss your petition. So you can't hurt their ego. All the hurting has to happen outside the court. So I can tell the arbitrators to fix up any time, but that was not possible in that scenario. So I'll tell you, the time zones play a big role. And I don't know whether anyone has taken this objection. I wouldn't take that myself in any of the arbitrations that I do, that this is grossly discriminatory to have a lawyer argue at 11 a.m. and to have another lawyer to get up in night and argue at 2 a.m. This is discriminatory in my opinion. But in an international scenario, you have to cope up with these challenges. So I think that, yes, as you rightly said, there might be some occasions where you have this inequality, but I think, as I told you, the parties need to be understanding. In a virtual setting, you have to show a little understanding, because the world is suffering from something that we have never seen before. And fortunate are we who can still keep the doors open for litigants in quest of justice, maybe through an arbitration or through virtual hearing. We are lucky enough to have this infrastructure to assist us in these difficult times. So I think there is no point to whine about or to cry about that. It's better to cope up with the changing situation and go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. So since you covered the technical aspect part in the previous question, this will be a candid question for you.
Yes.
So I would like to ask that what are the new techniques that we can adapt to in order to tackle the technical incapability? Like, what according to you are the technologies that are coming up?
Personally, I'll tell you that I haven't seen something that will compensate for adequate bandwidth and adequate virtual platform. If I do not have a minimum size screen, and if I do not have enough bandwidth, I don't see any application or any technical innovation for that matter to help me. I have to have these two as a basic. If I don't have it, it's better for me to be candid with the tribunal and tell them, boss, sorry, I can't do it online. Let's meet physically with all the precautions. I'll get only 2 guys along with me, so there won't be overcrowding in the conference room. I'll put the mask and then I'll argue. So I can be reasonable enough to tell them, and candid enough as well to tell them that, look, ODR is not something that's meant for me. But if you have these two, then I think there are certain things that you can really overcome. For example, I had read this somewhere that I think it's Delhi High Court did that Delhi High Court or Delhi Arbitration Center, that the parties were having some problem connecting to the platform, and then the tribunal or the court felt it not proper to listen to one party directly, and then other parties facing these problems, because as a judge, it really bothers you. And then the party who is having these technical interruptions they leave bad impression in your mind, and that's not right thing, because it's not their fault they are suffering. It's something that it's because of technical things it's happening, but that as a human being leaves a deep impression in your mind here, that while the party was arguing, there were so many glitches. So the court felt that this is not fair to hear one party uninterruptedly and hear other party with interruption. So what it did, quite innovative, it said record 20 minutes clip. I think you guys had asked me to do that in one of the emails, to record that clip and send it across. So that's something that was an innovation. That was an innovation by the tribunal and by the court, and it was phenomenal, because see, ultimately I am giving you 20 minutes to argue here. Why not you record your clip 20 minutes at your leisure, sitting at a place where you have a good bandwidth, and then send it across along with the written submissions. So these are the innovative approaches that you can really think of. But okay, and there is one more thing that you can do that I'm trying to do in one of the arbitration, is to have a neutral party. While cross-examining a witness at a remote location, I can ask a neutral party or neutral advocate in that city to be there, just to check if there are any malpractices happening. We can pay his charges, let's say like 5,000 per day or 2,000 per day, whatever, because that man is just doing what? He's watching. Instead of sitting at home, he's watching the proceedings. So he wouldn't charge you more, but that would ensure a fairness and the transparency. So not every time you need to have the technical innovations, you can have these innovations as well. to keep the parties in check in a virtual setting. So yes, you can certainly have these add-on innovations.
Thank
That
you,
Yep.
sir.
answer really, sir, that answer really covered each and every aspect of the topic. Thank you very much for that. And sir,
Yes.
the next question is the possibility of confidential information submitted in ODR proceedings being compromised is a real threat. Now, how to overcome this?
Mhm. Right. So this is going to be a really a tricky situation. Let me tell you that the process of virtual setting is yet to, it's a Pandora's box. Let me tell you, it looks good, it feels good, but it has got its own limitations. If you look at section 42A of the Arbitration Act, now the confidentiality is the most important thing. You must maintain the confidentiality. And if you look at section 34, if the parties breach with any of the provisions from which you cannot derogate, then it's again a ground for setting aside the award. So the breach of confidentiality, personally I have not seen the judgments which really connect the breach of confidentiality with setting aside of the award, but why not, it can happen. So the confidentiality is something that's most crucial. Even in international arbitrations, you do not see the reported judgments like we see. You don't see the reported awards. Now the ICC and SIC is coming out with redacted awards. That's what they call it, where the name of the party is obliterated. So the world at large really doesn't know as to who were the parties, because each and every party that goes to commercial arbitrations, if they are listed companies, then this news of arbitration litigation can severely hamper their stock prices. So this confidentiality is of utmost importance. I think the end-to-end IP end-to-end description can solve the problem. One, second, you must limit the number of participants in a virtual setting. It can't be that anyone who has a link can join. You must administer that process. I personally take a list of the people who are going to join the virtual meeting. I do not allow anyone to enter the room unless they are the ones whose name appear in that list, or if they are the ones whose name was not there but have a valid justification for entering the room, they can do that. But I think that locking of the room has to be foolproof. Merely because it's a virtual, it shouldn't be that ayaram gayaram, that whoever comes and then whoever gets off. That shouldn't happen, because that severely compromises the sanctity of the arbitral process. Because whatever, again, there has to be, I do that, I take an undertaking from the parties that they would not record the proceedings, because in Zoom you, the admin has this right of doing it. And I'll tell you my own way of doing it. I do not ask the parties to generally create a link and share with me. I do that myself. I have most of the paid versions of these softwares myself. I create a link, I send them, and my junior sitting over here, there is something called the tribunal secretary. He handles it for me, because being admin, then I am able to retain the control of most of the features, like who records the screen, who shares the screen, all that. So you can think of being an admin yourself. But sometimes, as I told you, former judges and old school lawyers find it difficult, to do both things, to apply their mind judicially and also look at these secretarial aspects. But then I think, being a tribunal, you should be able to uh, uh, devote your time equally for maintaining the procedural fairness as well as the judicious application of mind.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
sir. So, sir, as we talked about confidentiality between the parties, but there are like as you told us that now the like different institutions are having their own software where the parties could store their data, and there are times when there are like at most sensitive data is being uploaded for the arbitration as such. So, how does the institutions try to overcome the third party hacking or cyber squatting to protect that data?
Now, see, as I told you, I feel that there are most of the international institutions, they have come up with their own softwares. I think that's American AAA is called as a web file, WIPO. I think they have got ECAF. I think there is, as I told you, Netcase is International Chamber of Commerce. Paris's software is Netcase. Now, these are all the, in fact, just to tell you, there are also document sharing and e-discovery platforms made available by these international institutions like I think it's called Nuix Discover, there are Transperfect, then there is Epic. There are so many platforms that make this process of e-discovery simple. You have the facilities of automatic pagination, you have the electronic bundling, you get the bookmarking, you get the cross referencing, you get the retrieval of documents, and they provide a higher level of data security. Now, but I'm quite sure that we are not so much techno savvy to avail these softwares. Of course, they are not available to us unless you really go to those institutions and ask for their indulgence. But just to tell you that uh, these are the institutions who are really advanced for virtual setting. I think the time will come soon in India when you will have indigenous our domestic service providers like this, because document sharing becomes a critical task. And then what they do is to they have this document cloud-based file sharing softwares, where like you can have, of course, the Google Drive, Dropbox, there is Microsoft OneDrive. So the problem with all this is that they require a proactive approach. Like you need someone there to really regulate these softwares, operate these softwares. I think soon we will have a system meant for litigation and arbitration where you will have cloud based document storage. And I think then probably we will have that level of data security that you are talking of. IP to IP, of course you have the IP to IP encryption, but for document sharing I personally don't feel that we are good enough for data security. Unfortunately, of course, in India you don't have even good data protection laws apart from the one that's on the horizon. But I think the time is, I don't think we are mature enough to really vouch for data security.
Thank you so much, sir. The
Yeah.
next question is, there is almost universal agreement that mediation is most effective if the parties to the dispute are physically present before the mediator. How to tackle this particular issue? In ODR, there's no physical presence.
uh, I personally feel that, of course, the physical presence has got its own perks when it comes to mediation as well as in arbitration. I can tell you, like, if I'm cross examining a witness, then I can regulate his body language. I can regulate my tone. I can regulate my body language. I can look into his eyes. I can assess whether he is lying, he is being truthful, he is being candid, he is being defensive. I can see from his body language. The tribunal has a great advantage of seeing the witness physically because they can assess if he's lying or if he's truthful. If you're fidgeting with your something, if you're shaking your legs, those are the signs of nervousness that you really spot in a physical setting. Now these are the great handicaps that we face when we are in a virtual setting. But as I told you, with pros come cons, and then of course this is the part of the game. But when you're talking of mediation, and mediation in a virtual setting, as probably Urja rightly said, that yes, there are severe handicaps when you come to online mediation. But I personally feel like my senior was one of the most wanted mediator. Mr. Rafiq Dada was like, he was being appointed in most of the majority of the major arbitrations, mediations as an mediator. Uh, Generally, the best practice of a mediator is, to go into breakout rooms, talk to a party, try to understand their perspective, put yourself in the shoes of the party, what really they want, not what their egos want, what the parties want, and then try to filter out the egos from it and try to just take a substratum out of it, and then convey it to other party in another breakout room, and try to fizzle out the ego, just to take out the ego from the issue and just put the issues together and try to find a win-win situation by at the same time catering to the egos of the lawyers, catering to the egos of the parties, and then doing the needful. I think a skilled mediator can do this even in a virtual setting. Fortunately, we have the see, the mediations succeed and fall not because the parties meet each other physically. They succeed and fall because of how good the proposals are. How do you put across the proposals? How are the convincing skills of a mediator? If can they show them as to what are going to be the ill effects of fighting for so long and what are they going to get at the end of the day. So I think these all can happen in a virtual setting as well. provided of course you should have the enough good technical infrastructure like we are talking now. If we need to have this as a mediation conference, we can go in a breakout room, you guys can go into a breakout room, we can come out with the settlement. It can happen. Only thing is, of course, it would lack a little formalness. And you know, the biggest problem I'll tell you is online inhibition. Online inhibition is a concept where if I feel a little reluctant to do that in a physical setting, I do that boldly and brazenly in an online setting. Suppose if, you know, because of anonymity and because of the confidence that you guys can't get hold of me immediately, I'll be little bold, I'll be little brazen, and I'll say something without really bothering for the consequences. Suppose if you have a witness standing in that wooden box in a courtroom under the cross examination, the sheer pressure of that courtroom, the black robes and the gowns and the bands, that really make him tell the truth. But if I'm sitting at home having a cup of coffee, my wife watching a television opposite to me, and my children's playing around, I have a lot of room to say lie. You know, no, you are not going to catch hold of me. Maybe आप घर आओगे, फिर देखेंगे, फिर हमारा lawyer होगा, आपका lawyer होगा, you know, all that. I have that safety. But if I'm in a courtroom, the court can immediately arrest this guy. He's doing a contempt, put him in the jail, or maybe ask him to sit till the court rises. So I think this is called as an online inhibition effect. Now we need to reduce this online inhibition effect by putting in place certain safeguards, by telling the parties that whatever you are saying is something that will be taken on record, that will be used as a proof against you. You need to maintain the same decorum and same set of discipline, and making the lawyers also aware about the same. And I think if you virtual settings can really cope up with the changing needs of mediation. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Moving further, so there are insufficient legislative and judicial recognitions given to ODR. So due to this, the implementation of ODR is getting hampered. So what are you? What are your views on this?
No, personally speaking, I do not see, Shweta, that there are no judicial recognitions. On the contrary, I would say that there are enough judicial recognitions for these kind of ODR formats. Now, only problem is that ODR has to be done rightly. You know, ODR done negligently and casually face the same challenge like the dispute resolutions done physically, casually, and negligently. They both stand at par with each other if you are doing it casually and with negligence. If you are doing it carefully with adequate precautions in place, why not? They will have the same kind of recognition in the eyes of court. In fact, there is this judgment of Prafulla Desai versus State of Maharashtra, if you guys have heard of, where the high courts have held that video conferencing satisfies the requirement of presence of the accused. So the presence of the accused does not mean that you need to be physically present in the court. In Prafulla Desai, the high courts have said that under section 273 of CRPC, even if you're present online, that's good enough compliance of physical presence. And these are the judgments like which were delivered quite long back. So probably in present time though, I guess the courts will be more than happy to recognize the uh, online awards and online ODR. Only thing, as I told you, that must be done quite diligently. What I mean is, suppose if an arbitrator, I need to list out the procedural history of my matter. Suppose if there is an arbitration between, let's say, Urja and Shweta. Now, Urja is deliberately remaining absent for an arbitration with a hope that tomorrow she will challenge the award by saying, "Look, it was an ex parte award. I was never heard," and all that. So, as an arbitrator, I should be knowing the intentions of the this party, and then I should be asking Shweta to serve Urja on each and every occasion that, look, please inform her that today is the date. Urja doesn't appear. Then I again asked Shweta to please inform her again that this is the next date. So what I'm doing, I'm making my procedural history perfect with a hope and with anticipation that tomorrow she should not be in a position to challenge my award on the ground of violation of principles of natural justice. So if I am cautious enough at the outset or from the outset, then I think why not? The courts are bound to recognize the ODR format awards. Why not? Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir, for the answer. Now, moving on to the last question. Since we have already touched the major aspects of the following question, this will come as a candid question for you. The greatest challenge to ODR is developing a process that protects confidential information. Now, how to overcome this pertaining issue?
No, yes, I think the confidential thing that we just covered, I told you that I personally asked the parties to sign many things. Uh, Now that may be looked upon with little anguish, that parties may feel, "Arey, kitna sign karwayega humse," all that, and then how much don't you trust us? We said yes to arbitral process being virtual done. Don't you believe us? I said, I do believe you guys. No difficulty. Please sign it and send it across. Why? Because tomorrow, if the matter lands up in court, I need to have some document to show to the court that, look, these are the things that the parties had agreed. uh, See, in an arbitration, in a virtual setting, it becomes a very difficult to impose your own choice on the parties. If both the parties agree for virtual mode, it's an excellent thing. But most of the times you will see the party, one of the party, particularly respondent, do not agree for a virtual mode, because respondent is always the beneficiary of a delay. So they will say, nahi sir, ye corona to jayega abhi in February, you will get a vaccine, then why are you rushing into this? We will have this in month of March, and then aap day to day kar lo usko, and then we will finish it off. So you need to really know what the parties are and how their background is and what is their credential to really tackle with these kind of situations. If parties are dictating you their terms, then you must be cautious of your powers under section 19 of the Arbitration Act, which gives me a power to regulate the proceedings. Suppose in one of my recent arbitration, claimant had cross-examined respondents' witnesses physically just before the lockdown began in month of Feb. When it turned around and when the respondents' witnesses were to be, the claimant examined the respondent, and when the respondent wanted to examine the claimant's witness, this whole lockdown began. Respondent made a very valid point that, sir, look, here I'm losing an advantage. Claimant had an advantage of physically cross-examining and putting his pressure on a client, maybe through a senior counsel. But now here, if I'm asked to do it virtually, I'm in a little disadvantageous position, because I should be also doing it physically. Had he done it virtually, I had no problem to do it virtually. But having he done it physically, please allow me to do it physically. Fine enough. But if the party is saying this even before I begin my examination, then I have right to say no, that look, you both guys are going to cross-examine virtually. So I'm going to do it this way under section 19. That's it. So, and there is no judicial intervention under section 5. You can't have the judicial intervention unless you really go to section 34. Of course, in between section 17, 37. But the courts are not going to raise doubts about my integrity or my capability based on these decisions. So I am master of my own proceedings. Only thing is that I must make sure that I put in place certain safeguards before I go ahead with the virtual setting, including the confidentiality concerns.
Thank you so much, sir, for explaining us the topics and replying to all our queries and making us understand the concept of ODR's challenges in such an amazing way. I'm sure a lot of students will be benefited after seeing this session. And I would like to thank Urja, Shweta, and Krishnakant for joining us for this session, and even our principal in charge, Dr. Bhagishri Deshpande, ma'am, who is not in the session right now, but I'm sure she would be also delighted to hear about the same, and for our constant support and allowing us to have such initiatives. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, pleasure was all mine. It was really nice to see you guys here, and it's an excellent initiative you people have started. It's going to really benefit you long way in your career. So keep it up, guys. Nice to be
Thank
here.
you so much.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank you so much, sir.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yuvraj sir, for gracing this session with your knowledge, experience, and guidance on the topic of challenges in online dispute resolution. I'm sure students will be greatly benefited from this interactive session. Next, to place and record my special thanks to our principal in charge of Bharatiya Vidyapeeth, deemed to be University, New Law College, Pune, Dr. Bhagishri Deshpande, ma'am, for a constant support and guidance. A big thanks to the management team of our college, and a heartfelt thank to all the students participating in today's session. Thank you, everyone.